Hey everyone, this is your primer on how to write a thesis for a history essay. Rewatch or rewind as much as necessary because this is a really important skill that you're going to need for this class, for your future classes in high school, and for college. So we're going to get started with the word thesis itself. What is a thesis? Well, it is fundamentally, as we see Calvin and Susie doing here, an argument. It is the central argument of an essay. We can also call it a central claim. We can also think about it as an answer to a question. So in this class, you are going to be writing essays based on questions that I give you, and your thesis is a very concise answer to it. In other classes, when you write a thesis, you may not be given an actual essay question to respond to, but any thesis that you write is in fact an answer to a question whether you recognize it or not. When you eventually write a research paper, the first thing that you should do is craft a research question, and your thesis is an answer to it. We can also think of the thesis as the heart of the essay. Maybe we could also call it the brain. In either case, it is of crucial importance to the life of the essay. If your thesis is weak, your entire essay is dead from the start. The thesis goes in the introductory paragraph, so the first paragraph of the essay after the opening 3 to 5 sentences, what we might call the introduction, or what we're going to call in history the historical context. So remember the funnel that you learned in English class? We are bringing it back again here. It is an excellent structure to understand and applies across disciplines. So we see that the thesis goes here, just like in an English essay, at the end of the introductory paragraph. All right, now we're getting into some of the harder stuff here. So the thesis structure has 2 components, and you really need to make sure that your thesis has both of them. First of all, the thesis must, in very clear, concise language, answer the question that I have given you and provide a roadmap to the essay's organization. The roadmap is the same as what your English teacher has called supporting points. This is so that your reader knows where you are going to be heading. The thesis itself will be 1 to 2 sentences, generally not more, and certainly not less than 1. Now we are going to take a look at the similarities and differences between the thesis structure you know from freshman English and the thesis structure that you will use in this class. And I really want you to understand what it is that is similar, so you're not learning something totally new, but what it is that is also different so that you can understand what I expect as we go forward. So first of all, as far as the similarities go, the thesis must do the same thing in both essays. It needs to provide a central claim, meaning an argument, okay, and it must provide a roadmap or supporting points to tell your reader where your essay is headed. It is also 1 to 2 sentences in both history and English essays, and in both cases it goes the last couple of sentences at the end of the introduction. The first difference that we're going to look at here is how you've been perceiving the thesis itself. In freshman English, your teacher likely asked you to make a statement of theme or to analyze a character or an idea in the story. Maybe you had to trace a motif. And so you've thought about a thesis likely as this theme statement as opposed to answering a prompt. In history class, I'm going to be giving you the essay questions, and so every time you write a thesis, just think about it as an answer to the question. In both cases, it's still an argument, but this might just be a little bit, you might think about them a little bit differently here. Secondly, in freshman English essays, you were taught how to write a universal theme statement. So you might say in a certain book by a certain author, the author suggests that war dehumanizes individuals. This is something that is universally true. And that's the appropriate thing to do for this type of English essay. In history essays, however, we are not going to be making universal statements. Instead, we are going to be making statements that are very specific to the question and that means specific to a particular period of time and a particular experience. So perhaps a similar thesis says something like, the experience of World War I's trenches left soldiers forever lost. Thirdly, in English essays, you have been analyzing just one book, and so your thesis statement included the author's name and book title, like in All Quiet on the Western Front, Eric Maria Remarque suggests that, and then you go on to say, war dehumanizes individuals. In history essays, you're not going to be analyzing a particular book, so there will be no author name or book title in your thesis. And the book that you may be using quite a bit is our school or our class textbook, but you're never actually going to reference that textbook's name or authors anywhere in your essay. Fourthly, and this is something that we will explore a little bit more as we continue throughout the course, the question here is, how many body paragraphs should an essay have? In freshman English, I think you started with maybe 2 body paragraphs and worked your way up to 3, but you were given a very specific number by your English teacher, so you must have 3 supporting points. In history essays, the number of supporting points or body paragraphs is going to be variable depending on what the best organization is for the question. So if there's ample information, ample supporting points you could use, and you think, wow, there's really 3 great ones, then you should use them. But if you have found some sort of organization where you're thinking, I've got 2 really good ones, and I don't know what that 3rd one would be, I could make something up, but it doesn't really match, then in that case, you would only want to do 2. So we'll look at a lot of examples of this later on. Finally, this goes for the essay as a whole. In English essays, you are writing in the present tense because we regard books as kind of living, current creatures. And in history, it's history. We're writing about the past, so your thesis statement should be written in the past. Usually. Occasionally there are times where present tense makes sense. My rule here is if you were talking about whatever subject you're discussing with another person, what tense would you use? That's the tense that you should write in your paper. Okay, so we're going to launch into some examples here, and we're going to start with one that is neither a history example nor an English example, but it's just, a timeless question. So, why did the chicken cross the road? Our thesis here is the chicken crossed the road to escape being eaten by a fox, to meet up with a nice-looking rooster, and ultimately to get to the other side. So we need to examine if this thesis meets the structural criteria that I set out earlier. First of all, does it meet the length requirement of 1 to 2 sentences? Yes, it's 1 sentence. Secondly, and more importantly, does the thesis statement answer the question of why the chicken crossed the road? Absolutely. In fact, we get 3 reasons why the chicken crossed the road. And that leads into the second part of the structure. Does this thesis statement provide a roadmap to the essay's organization? And again, the answer is yes. And this looks exactly like what you learned in freshman English, where you have 3 parallel points. So that your first body paragraph is going to be about escaping being eaten by a fox. Your second body paragraph would be about meeting up with a nice-looking rooster. And the third body paragraph is about getting to the other side. 1, 2, 3. So this should look very familiar to you, I think, and I hope. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at a history example. But again, this is a history example that should hopefully feel very comfortable to you because it fits the format that you learned in freshman English in a number of ways. Okay, so here you have a prompt, analyze the consequences of the Black Death. And our argument is, or our thesis is, the Black Death had devastating but also favorable consequences as evidenced by the impact of the disease on the European economy, religious practices, and culture. So let's do our check here. Is it the right length? Yes, it's 1 sentence. Is there an argument that answers the question? The question asks, what were the consequences or the impact of the Black Death? The argument here is that the consequences were devastating and favorable. That's an argument, right? Someone could argue they were wholly devastating. Someone could argue that they were wholly favorable. Someone could argue that they were mixed, as I have here. So any of those is an argument. Okay? And then do we have a roadmap to the essay's organization? Again, the answer is yes. It is written in parallel points, and we can easily identify them here. So paragraph 1 will be on the economy, paragraph 2 will be on religious practices, and paragraph 3 will be on culture. Great, no problem. Writing a thesis is easy. It's just like what you learned in English class, right? Right, but not always. So one of the things that you're going to have to learn to do this year is how to break the formula responsibly and yet still make an argument and provide a roadmap. And this is where the challenge comes in, but we're going to do a lot of practice and we're going to deal with a lot of different kinds of essay questions, and you're going to get very, very good at it. So I am going to show you one example so that you can see where we are headed and understand what a thesis can look like besides what you have already seen. So here's our example. Compare and contrast the ideas of Machiavelli and Mirandola on the nature of man. The thesis. Both Machiavelli and Mirandola assert the idea that man has free will, but they fundamentally differ on how he chooses to use it. Machiavelli's pessimistic view of human nature leads him to argue that a prince must pursue any means to gain and maintain power, while Mirandola's positive view of human nature serves as the foundation for his view that man can do great and presumably moral things. So, this does not look like the kind of thesis that you have written in the past because it does not have 3 parallel points, but it is still a strong thesis that meets the 3 critical criteria. First of all, is it the right length? Yes, it's 2 sentences. Secondly, and more importantly, does it answer the question? Yes. The question asks us to compare, meaning find a similarity, and contrast, meaning find a difference between the ideas of 2 Renaissance authors, Machiavelli and Mirandola, on the topic of the nature of man. And this thesis does that. In the first clause, both Machiavelli and Mirandola assert the idea that man has free will. That is a similarity between these 2 authors on the nature of man. Okay? And then the rest of that sentence, but they fundamentally differ on how he chooses to use it, addresses the point of contrast. The second sentence then, that starts with Machiavelli's pessimistic view, is merely a clarification or a further delving into what that difference is. So, how would you organize this essay? It may not be abundantly clear to you right now, but what I would likely do is have 1 paragraph on this point of similarity and a second paragraph on the point of contrast. And I would leave this as a 2-body paragraph essay as opposed to a 3-paragraph one. So that's your primer on how to write a thesis statement. This should give you some good ways to get started here, and we will keep working and working and working at this, and you will become an expert by the end of the school year. Happy writing!